Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Wishing you a peaceful night full of rest and relaxation. Tonight we're heading somewhere misty, ancient, and just a little jittery. You're standing on a steep slope of the Ethiopian highlands, where the clouds drag their lazy fingers across the trees, and the breeze smells faintly of wet bark, charcoal smoke, and something else, something earthy. A little bitter and almost electric. It's the scent of coffee berries ripening on wild shrubs, though you wouldn't call it that yet. You don't even know what coffee is. What you do know is that the goats are acting weird. One minute they're grazing peacefully. The next, they're bouncing on rocks like caffeinated toddlers at a birthday party. Their herder, a wiry young man named Kaldi, stands nearby, arms crossed, forehead creased. You recognize that look, equal parts worry, and, should I eat the thing that made the goats act like this? Spoiler alert, of course he does. You're in Ethiopia, somewhere around the 9th century, in a rugged corner where oral legends thrive and written records politely decline to participate. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch low behind a patch of wild rosemary, watching Kaldi pluck a few berries and turn them over in his hands. They're small, reddish, and glossy, each one cradled in a tight green husk. You can almost hear them whispering, "Try me." A bite, a grimace. The flavor? Sour, tough, and not especially promising. But within minutes, Kaldi's mood lifts. His gait quickens. His goats seem less ridiculous. Something inside him is switched on. Now, here's where the myth takes its first dreamy turn. Kaldi, being the conscientious lad that he is, doesn't just start snacking on the berries like trail mix. Instead, he gathers them in a makeshift pouch, probably animal hide, or a bundle of spare cloth tied with vine, and sets off for the nearest monastery. And by sets off, I mean hikes for several hours through mud, thorns, and the occasional hyena howl. You follow him into the hills, boots squishing in the soft earth, night falling like a velvet curtain. At last, flickering torchlight appears ahead, and you reach the stone gate of a centuries-old Christian monastery, likely of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. The monks are wary. They've seen strange herbs before. Some made people wise. Some made people dead. Kaldi is ushered inside, but you linger just outside the heavy doors, listening. He explains the goats, the berries, the energy. You can almost hear the skeptics inside rubbing their beards. And here's where it gets weird. The monks try roasting the berries over the fire, possibly out of curiosity or maybe just to exorcise whatever goat-dancing demons they believe reside within. The result? Something burns. Something pops. The smell that rises from the fire is unlike anything they've experienced. Rich, smoky, earthy. Intrigued but still suspicious, they toss the beans into water and try drinking it. And drumroll, they hate it. Probably too bitter, too burnt, too strange. Legend says they chuck the whole pot into the fire. But even as they do, something lingers in the air. That unmistakable aroma. Even in rejection, coffee begins its seduction. Historians still argue whether Kaldi actually existed, or if he's just a fable wrapped in goat hair and optimism. But most agree that somewhere in this stretch of misty mountains and sacred routines, humans began to notice the power of the coffee cherry. A mainstream historical fact. The region of Kaffa in Ethiopia is widely regarded as the biological origin of Coffea arabica, the species that fuels 60% of the world's coffee today. A fringe tidbit? Some early users may have mashed the berries with animal fat to create caffeinated energy balls, basically prehistoric espresso bites. Back at the monastery, things are changing. The monks didn't love the brew, but they also didn't forget it. Maybe it helped one of them stay awake during midnight prayers. Maybe it kept an elder monk unusually chipper during fasting. One curious sip at a time, the legend begins to brew. Outside the monastery gates, dawn breaks over the hills like warm milk spilling across velvet. The goats have settled. Kaldi, half dozing under a cedar tree, probably dreams of bouncing hooves and firelight. You sit nearby, cradling an imaginary cup that hasn't been invented yet, and wonder just how far this accidental discovery will go. Spoiler: you probably won't survive this timeline long enough to see a single cafe open. But don't worry, you're here for the long dream. You wake, or rather, drift further, into a monastery courtyard cloaked in fog. The air is scented with damp stone and just the faintest trace of something roasted. Not bread, not incense. Something unfamiliar but oddly comforting. Inside the walls, Kaldi's beans haven't been entirely forgotten. One younger monk, barefoot, eyes sunken from too many sleepless vigils, has been quietly experimenting. He's kept a small bundle of the curious red berries hidden behind a loose stone in the dormitory wall. Every so often, he sneaks a few into the corner hearth when the others aren't watching. You perch on a smooth stone near the coals and watch as the beans crack, hiss, and release that warm, smoky perfume again. This monk, let's call him Tadessa, isn't trying to start a revolution. He just wants to stay awake long enough to copy a few more lines of scripture before his eyelids betray him. He roasts the berries slowly, grinding them with a dull pestle on a flat basalt slab until they resemble something between gravel and soot. Then he boils them in rainwater, muttering a quick prayer, either to sanctify the concoction or to brace for whatever might happen to his insides. You sip along with him. The taste is still rough, woody, bitter, not quite the smooth espresso shot you know, but it does something. The warmth travels down your spine and lights a tiny candle behind your eyes. The silence of the monastery deepens around you, but now it feels less oppressive and more alert. Tadesse isn't alone for long. Word spreads through whispers and yawns. Other monks, curious or desperate, join in. Soon, there's an unofficial midnight brew circle forming after evening prayers. The rules? Stay quiet. Share what you've gathered. Pretend nothing's different in the morning. Historians still argue whether this early form of coffee resembled today's beverage at all. Was it more like a tea made from leaves and husks? A fermented fruit mash? A broth from roasted beans? The truth is, nobody left a recipe. All we have are echoes and assumptions, passed down through oral tradition and the occasional dreamy metaphor. Still, we know the role it began to play. Within these stone walls, coffee transformed from curiosity to companion. The monks called it buna, a word that still rings through Ethiopian kitchens and cafes today. By the flickering glow of whale oil lamps and firewood, you see sleep-deprived scribes and weary chanters pass around clay bowls, their hands cupped carefully as if holding something sacred, or maybe just hot enough to burn the devil out. A mainstream fact? Ethiopian monastic life in the medieval period was intensely rigorous. Daily fasting, long prayers, minimal sleep. Anything that could support such ascetic devotion without breaking doctrinal rules was quietly welcomed. A fringe tidbit? Some remote Ethiopian communities still tell tales of talking coffee, where a particularly strong batch is believed to give divine inspiration, prophetic dreams, or very animated arguments at the village council. Of course, coffee's path to sacred status wasn't smooth. Suspicion lingered. You overhear older monks murmuring that Buna stirs the blood too much, that it invites restlessness. One declares, with a squint and dramatic pause, "It may be from God, but it feels like a conversation with the devil." A little harsh, perhaps, but not unexpected. You nod politely and quietly keep sipping. The moment that seals coffee's survival happens one unusually cold night. A senior monk, nearly asleep on his feet during a midnight chant, is offered a warm bowl of the black liquid. He hesitates, then drinks, then sings the remaining verses with a clarity that stuns even the birds outside. No one says anything, but the next night, the pot is twice as large. Soon, the smell becomes part of the monastery's rhythm. It blends with beeswax, with parchment glue, with the faint perfume of cedar wood. You begin to crave it, not just the drink, but the ritual, the grinding, the pouring, the long silences filled only by the clink of clay and the slow unraveling of fatigue. Out in the surrounding forests, wild coffee shrubs flourish in the shade, their red berries clustered like garnets. You stroll among them with a woven basket in hand, brushing away damp leaves, inhaling that musky green scent of rain-soaked plants. You pluck the ripest fruits, sticky with nectar, and imagine them already roasting beside monkish sandals. Back at the monastery, the drink is still a secret, but secrets, as you know, tend to seep through cracks, especially when they smell this good. You wake to the quiet rustling of robes and the soft scuff of sandals on stone. The monastery has settled into a sleepy, pre-dawn hush, but deep inside its walls, something has begun to change. Coffee, Buna, is no longer a quirky experiment passed in secret among tired monks. It's starting to take root, like ivy creeping up the altar. You follow Tedeschi again, now a little older, his back more bowed from years of hunching over manuscripts. He moves with purpose to the communal fire pit just before the morning bells. The pot waiting there is familiar, wide, blackened with use, and filled with water that already hints of smoke and something darker. By now, everyone knows what he's doing, and no one is stopping him. That's progress. A small group of monks has formed around the practice. They begin to treat it not just as fuel, but as ritual. One grinds the beans, another stirs the pot. A third lights the incense, not because coffee requires incense, but because everything feels more holy when paired with smoke and silence. You sit nearby, hands warmed by the rising steam, watching the faces of men who've been up since midnight. They sip slowly, reverently. Some close their eyes. One mutters a prayer. Another cracks a rare smile. Monastic life here is not gentle. Days begin before sunrise with the singing of Zima chants, an ancient liturgical melody that winds like fog through stone corridors. Meals are sparse, mostly lentils, flatbread, and whatever the rain hasn't ruined. Days are filled with transcription, prayer, maintenance, and spiritual struggle. The coffee helps, not by replacing devotion, but by anchoring it. It gives the monks just enough sharpness to hold the long chants in their heads, just enough energy to finish a page of scripture without falling asleep mid-verse. A mainstream fact? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained a tradition of lengthy, immersive worship since the early centuries of Christianity. Some liturgies last 4 hours or more. Staying alert is practically a spiritual obligation. Fringe tidbit. Some oral traditions suggest certain monks believed Buna made their dreams more vivid, or even allowed them to see angels more clearly. Whether that's divine clarity or caffeine hallucination is still up for debate. And debate there is. Not everyone is convinced this dark brew is innocent. One senior monk argues that anything this stimulating must be at least adjacent to sin. Another counters, if God didn't want us to drink it, He wouldn't have made the beans smell like heaven when roasted. Touché. Historians still argue whether early coffee practices were tolerated out of pragmatism or quietly encouraged under the guise of medicinal benefit. Did monks embrace it for stamina, or did they sense something sacred in the process itself? You peek into the monastery's modest infirmary, where a novice is boiling crushed berries with wild herbs. Coffee, now blended into healing tonics, is considered helpful for headaches, melancholy, and unproductive stupor, which is, frankly, a poetic way to describe Mondays. What started as a midnight indulgence has now found its way into morning routines, healing rituals, and even fast-breaking meals. No longer just a drink, it's become an unspoken pact among the brothers, an understanding, a shared hush before the work begins. You leave the monastery for a moment, your steps echoing down a goat path lined with dew-wet grass. The forest presses in close, and everywhere around you are wild coffee shrubs, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. You brush your fingers along a low branch, berries cool and firm to the touch. It's here, among the trees, that you meet a passing traveler, a pilgrim. He's heard of the drink from a cousin's cousin, something about monks who pray with their eyes open longer than nature intended. He's curious. You offer him a small pouch of roasted beans wrapped in cloth. He accepts it like a relic, and just like that, coffee begins to wander. You return to the monastery in time for the midday bell. Tadesse is there, standing by the fire, handing a clay bowl to a monk you haven't seen before. The younger man's eyes widen at the first sip. You smile. You've seen that look before. The drink isn't perfect yet. Still harsh, still wildly variable depending on the roast and the water and the moon phase probably. But something has taken hold. As dusk slips in, a breeze carrying sandalwood smoke and roasting bean mingles with the last light. Inside, the monks are preparing for another long night of chanting, copying, and disciplined alertness. And you too feel awake, just enough. You're no longer just an observer in this sleepy monastic world. You're now a full participant in the rhythm of the brew. As you stir the coals beneath the pot, you realize the drink's reach has quietly extended beyond the monastery's thick stone walls. Coffee has begun its slow trickle outward, not as a revolution, but as a whisper. It's not yet a commodity, not yet a ceremony, but it is a story that spreads mouth to mouth, bean to bean, village to village. And in 14th century Ethiopia, stories have legs. You're following a caravan now, your feet crunching over dry, cracked earth and patches of stubborn scrub grass. These are the highland trade paths, winding between villages, market towns, and remote hilltop shrines. The air is thinner here, cooler, but the stories travel just as fast. One trader, robes stained with road dust and the scent of dried frankincense, pulls out a pouch tied with leather string. Inside, roasted coffee beans, dark and fragrant. He offers one to a farmer in exchange for a gourd of fresh goat milk, a small trade. But it plants a seed. The farmer's daughter starts roasting beans on a pan. No prayers, no incense, just a curiosity. She adds crushed herbs, a pinch of salt, even a hint of honey. It's not the monk's brew, but it wakes you up just the same. A mainstream fact: coffee plants are indigenous to Ethiopia, particularly the Kaffa region. Hence, the name many believe birthed the word coffee. Kaffa itself becomes a key hub of this bean's early journey. Fringe tidbit: some old folk songs from the Sidama region contain lyrics that sound suspiciously like odes to coffee, long before formal cultivation ever took place. Were they singing about its energy, its smell? Or was Buna just a metaphor for spirited gossip at the market? Historians still argue whether coffee's spread across Ethiopia was intentional or accidental. Did people recognize its stimulant powers immediately? Or did it piggyback on trade routes, tied up with goat hides, incense, and wild garlic without anyone noticing the magic in the bag? You arrive in a small village nestled near a crescent-shaped lake. A weekly market bustles under woven reed awnings. Traders display honeycombs, polished obsidian blades, dried fish, and, yes, tiny piles of brown beans. One elder woman stands over a shallow brazier, gently fanning a layer of coffee as it roasts. Her face is all cheekbones and smile lines. She calls it Buna and invites you to sit. This is your first true coffee ceremony, if you can call it that yet. The green beans are roasted slowly while everyone watches. The scent wafts in spirals through the air, drawing neighbors like moths. The roasted beans are ground with a wooden mortar and boiled in a round black jebana, a spouted clay pot. You listen as they tell stories, not just about the drink, but about births, rains, lost goats, ancestors. It's not the coffee itself that brings them together. It's the excuse to linger, to talk, to pause. They pour the coffee 3 times: abul, tona, and barika. First strong, then softer, then delicate and perfumed. Each round is a little longer, a little more intimate. No one's in a hurry. You're barely blinking, but you're not restless. The youngest child fidgets beside you, offering a handful of dried figs. His grandmother shoos him, then hands you another cup. It's less about staying awake and more about staying here. A local priest joins the circle, robes trailing dust, face sun-darkened. He blesses the gathering. Whether it's for the coffee or the company, you're not sure. But the jabina steams, and the sky turns orange, and the villagers lean in close. You realize now, this drink isn't spreading because it's useful. It's spreading because it's beautiful. You return to the monastery days later with a pouch full of stories, and a different roasting technique you learned from the grandmother by the lake. Tades tries it and nods slowly. "Too much cardamom," he mutters, but pours a second cup anyway. And so the exchange continues, between sacred and mundane, between ritual and daily routine. Coffee moves not in leaps but in slow spirals, like steam rising from a clay pot. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, you picture those spirals, rising above clay roofs, curling through cedar trees, mingling with chants and laughter and the scent of roasted fruit. You're not just watching history, you're inhaling it. You awaken to the sound of distant drums, a faint, rhythmic echo rolling across the hills like a heartbeat from the earth itself. The land has changed. You've left the highland paths behind and now journey eastward toward the drier plains where the Oromo people dwell. It's here that coffee's story deepens, not with monasteries or markets, but with warriors, cattle, and a worldview shaped by the land's shifting moods. You follow a group of Oromo herders at dawn, the air still cool, their silhouettes sharp against the blue-gold horizon. Slung at one man's side isn't a weapon, but a goatskin pouch filled with something rattling. Not coins, not charms, coffee beans. But this isn't your sippable monastery brew. Not yet. They chew them. Yes, you heard that right. Whole, raw, unroasted, chewed like dried berries for stamina during long hunts or herd drives. It's gritty, it's bitter, and it works. A gritty handful of beans mashed with animal fat becomes a portable energy ball, the ancient equivalent of a protein bar. Mainstream fact: the Oromo are widely credited with some of the earliest known use of the coffee plant, not as a drink, but as a chewable stimulant or mashed paste foodstuff. This likely predates boiling or brewing by centuries. Fringe tidbit: some accounts mention warriors performing pre-battle chants while passing bowls of mashed coffee and ghee. One old folktale even suggests that the rhythm of a clan's war chant was based on the sound of beans being ground under stone, though honestly, that could be poetic license. Historians still argue whether the Oromo originated this practice or adopted it from forest dwellers deeper in Kaffa. The oral histories blur, bleed, and overlap, like watercolor on handmade paper. What's certain? This is coffee's primal form, functional, earthy, and entirely unpretentious. You crouch beside a young herder as he scoops the mashed mixture into a hollowed gourd. He offers you a taste. It's not delicious, but a surprising warmth creeps up your spine. Less like caffeine and more like raw determination. Like you could walk 20 miles and still remember every cow's name. In the village, coffee takes a different shape. The women roast small handfuls on flat pans over open flames. They don't yet call it a ceremony, but it's already rhythmic. Roast, grind, boil, pour. Conversations soften. Neighbors gather. Time stretches. You meet a midwife preparing a bowl of roasted beans mixed with warming spices for a woman in labor. It's not for drinking. It's to place by her head, to awaken her spirit and soothe the pain, they say. The smell tells the soul to stay alert, she whispers. It calls strength back into the body. In the shade of a woven grass hut, a grandmother cracks open dried beans and tells stories about the time the coffee trees wept during a drought. They cried beans instead of tears, she says, eyes twinkling. You smile, even if your eyebrows raise slightly. And yet, among the Oromo, Buna is more than a plant. It's part of Gada, the ancient socio-political system that governs everything from marriage to warfare. When leaders meet to make decisions, roasted coffee might be placed at the center of the circle, steaming in silence, as if asking, "Are we awake enough for wisdom?" You sit cross-legged beside a gathering of elders beneath a fig tree. There's no rush. One speaks, another listens. Then coffee is poured, thick and strong, from a metal kettle shaped like a cow's horn. You taste earth and ash and time. There's no incense, no gospel music, just the click of beads, the rustle of robes, and the pulse of generations remembering. And still, the debate continues. Are these practices local adaptations, spiritual innovations, pure practicality, or were they always tied to something deeper, a belief that wakefulness itself is sacred? You stretch out under a star-washed sky, the fire crackling low beside you. The wind smells like smoke and dried grass and a hint of charred bean. Somewhere a drum starts up again, steady and low. And you wonder, not for the first time, if it's not the coffee that keeps people awake, but the stories built around it. That slow unraveling of time, cup by cup, song by song, bean by bean. In the distance, a herder softly hums a lullaby as he leads his cattle toward the river, and with that sound in your ears, you finally drift, not away, but deeper in. You're jolted gently, not by alarm, not by panic, but by the sizzle of water over hot stones and the soft rise of dawn mist. You're in Harar now, a walled city of sun-bleached alleys and blue doors, perched like a dream between mountains and desert. It's the 15th century. The scent of roasted coffee is sharper here, more perfumed, more deliberate. No longer just sustenance for monks or warriors, it's becoming something elegant, ceremonial, even diplomatic. Harar is a trading port without a sea, a hub where spices, textiles, and stories drift through from Arabia, India, and the interior of Africa. And now, coffee. You trail a slender man down the narrow cobblestone lanes. His name is Idris, and he runs a merchant guest house near the eastern gate. On his rooftop terrace, shaded with woven reed mats, he begins what you quickly learn is a very specific routine. First, the green beans, carefully sorted, never rushed. Then roasted in a shallow metal pan over glowing coals until the skins crackle and curl like wood bark. He fans the smoke toward you on purpose, with a grin. Smell is part of the brew, he says. It wakes the memory before the tongue. Mainstream fact. By the 15th century, Harar had become a regional center of Islamic learning and trade, and coffee drinking became more formalized among scholars and merchants, particularly in Sufi religious circles. Fringe tidbit. Some travelers claimed that Harari hosts brewed coffee with bits of frankincense, or even dried orange peel. One fanciful poem refers to a cup that smells of camel breath and paradise. Interpret at your own risk. Historians still argue whether the rituals seen in Harar were borrowed from Arabian customs or grew organically from Oromo and highland Ethiopian traditions. Either way, something new is brewing here. Refined, deliberate, almost theatrical. You sip from a tiny porcelain cup painted with blue flowers. The coffee is strong, but not bitter. It lingers at the back of your tongue like poetry. A child appears from behind a curtain, bearing a plate of small sugared breads and fresh caught leaves. You decline the cat, one vice at a time. There's a particular pace to this coffee gathering. It's neither rushed nor idle. The conversation sways like palm leaves in soft wind, never loud, never urgent. A merchant describes a giraffe he saw in the lowlands. A scholar offers a verse from the Quran. Someone quotes a proverb. Boona without friends is a bean lost in the pot. You laugh softly. It sounds old, like it was said long before there were pots. Then, a new voice joins the group. A poet visiting from the Red Sea coast. She speaks of Yemeni port cities, of the boats that now arrive filled with silks and incense, and increasingly with beans. Your beans. Because now the trade winds are shifting. Coffee is no longer a local curiosity. It's being carried across the sea, across languages, across empires, from the hills of Kaffa to the harbors of Mocha. The name may change, but the aroma stays the same. In a stone-walled study chamber near the city mosque, you watch a group of Sufi mystics prepare for an evening dhikr, a rhythmic chanting meditation. Before it begins, they drink coffee, hot, dark, plain. It sharpens their focus, keeps them in the moment, anchored. They say the Prophet Muhammad himself praised the virtues of wakefulness in prayer. Whether that included coffee is anyone's guess, but the believers here draw a line from spirit to cup without hesitation. Later that night, Idris leads you to a small window overlooking the southern gate. From here, he says, You can smell Arabia. You don't quite, but the idea takes root. In your mind, you see the ships already waiting, their holds open, their sailors sleepy. They don't know it yet, but they're about to carry the dreams of a continent across the sea. Back in Idris's courtyard, a girl fans embers beneath a jabina. A cat dozes by the doorway. You cradle your final cup in both hands and watch the steam rise in lazy spirals. It's the same spiral from the monastery, from the village, from the field. It's all one cup. And tomorrow, someone will carry that cup to another land, another table, another mouth. But for now, you drink and listen and lean into the silence between stories. You awaken in motion. The camel beneath you groans softly as it plods through the sun-glazed heat. You're part of a caravan now, an early 16th century merchant convoy snaking its way toward the Red Sea coast. Behind you, somewhere in the haze of memory and hoofprints, lies Harar. Ahead, invisible for now, but utterly magnetic, lies the port of Mocha. And in your satchel, a tightly bundled parcel of beans. Your beans. Ethiopian, wild-grown, dark and sharp and priceless. You are, for all intents and purposes, an international coffee smuggler. Congratulations! But this is no secret mission. These traders are quite open about their cargo. Coffee is now a known substance, a sought-after good, and a gift-worthy item. More than that, it's becoming a statement of refinement, of identity, of spirit. Mainstream fact. By the early 1500s, Ethiopian beans were regularly transported via camel caravan to Yemeni ports like Mocha, where they would be roasted, brewed, and eventually re-exported to the Ottoman world and beyond. Mocha would give its name to the global coffee trade, but Ethiopia was always the root. Fringe tidbit. Some legends say certain traders tried to keep beans sterile, boiling or parching them before export, to prevent foreign soil from growing stolen coffee plants. Others claim this was just rumor, brewed stronger than fact. You wonder if anyone ever actually tried burying roasted beans to sprout a tree. Spoiler, doesn't work. Historians still argue whether coffee cultivation began in Yemen independently, or whether the original plants were all transplants from Ethiopian forests. Either way, the two regions are now tangled in the same hot, fragrant destiny. Your caravan stops beneath a date palm for midday rest. The camels kneel. Cloth tents blossom. Fires spark to life. A wide-brimmed trader named Halif invites you to sit. From a battered metal pot, he pours coffee. Yes, in the desert, under the sun, at noon. You raise an eyebrow. He laughs. Better to sweat awake than dream thirsty, he says. A proverb? A joke? A caffeine-fueled fever? The coffee here tastes different, boiled long, spiced with cardamom and cinnamon. It's sweeter than anything you drank in the highlands, and it hits faster. Your heart bumps like a drum. You chew on a clove to calm your tongue. That night, under stars sharp enough to etch glass, the merchants sit in a circle, sipping and murmuring. No loud songs, no Sufi chants, just the clink of tin cups, the low shuffle of sand, and tales of prices, storms, and port gossip. A man from Aden speaks of a new Ottoman governor who drinks 3 cups every morning and refuses visitors until the jitters kick in. Another swears that a Venetian trader tried to buy a ship's worth of beans for his personal stash, to keep his thoughts faster than his rivals' swords. You imagine a world where power isn't measured in gold or ships, but in beans. And somehow, it makes sense. As the caravan moves again the next morning, you pass small shrines built of rock and dust. At one, an old woman burns herbs and tosses a few dried beans into the fire. An offering. She says the smell pleases the spirits, or maybe it just pleases her. Either way, the smoke smells like hope. And finally, you reach the coast. Mocha. You expect a grand city, but what you find is more subtle. Huddled homes of coral stone, market stalls beneath sun-bleached cloth, narrow lanes that funnel wind like a flute. But everywhere, the smell of coffee. From spice merchants, from street vendors, from the hearths of seaside cafes where men argue over poetry and port taxes. You wander the docks. Sailors unload beans, taste samples, argue over moisture content and roasting time. You spot a sack stamped with a symbol from Harar, another marked Kaffa. One even claims Mountain of God, which seems like marketing, but hey, who's checking? The portmaster eyes your satchel. Ethiopian? He asks. You nod. He grins and gestures to a warehouse where beans are being sorted by grade, color, and size like gemstones. You're offered a brew in a tiny porcelain cup, spiced, sweet, familiar, and yet not. The recipe has shifted again, crossing water, crossing tongues. And this, you realize, is where the story spills outward, into Europe, into Asia, into the world. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight, you stand on a rooftop and watch the sails of outbound ships vanish into the moonlight, carrying your beans, your story, your waking dream. The wind smells like salt and cinnamon and something almost like home. You stay longer in Mocha than you expect. Maybe it's the sea air, or the sleep-thick scent of roasting beans that greets you every morning. Or maybe it's that here, finally, you see coffee treated not just as a sacred brew or a humble energy kick, but as a commodity, a delicate, demanding diva of global trade. You walk through dusty alleyways, past goat carts and crates of ginger, to find the heart of it all. Mocha's coffee auctions. Loud, theatrical, sometimes baffling. Brokers pace beneath canvas awnings, arguing about bean density and rainfall on faraway hills they've never seen. Young boys run samples from sack to sack, slicing jute cords and scooping beans like treasure. And there, always, is the slouching figure of the mukassib, the professional coffee taster. Mainstream fact: Mocha's port became the primary hub for global coffee export from the 15th to 18th centuries, especially after the Ottomans captured Yemen in 1536. The city was small but powerful, and its very name became shorthand for coffee quality worldwide. Fringe tidbit: some tasters claim they could identify the bean's precise origin just by sniffing the roast. Others insisted they only pretended, using clever guesses and dramatic flair. One European visitor called it coffee theater. Historians still argue whether the famed mocha taste was due to local roasting practices, shipping conditions, or just marketing genius. But the myth stuck, and so did the name. In one auction courtyard, a heated debate erupts over a shipment from Kaffa. A merchant swears the beans are too earthy, too wild. Another shrugs and says, that's why they're real. You sip a brew from that very bag and it hits your tongue with a forested sharpness, like pine smoke and dried fig. Wild? Yes, but honest. The truth is, Mocha has become a place of invention, not just in trade, but in flavor. Here, coffee meets spice. Brewers mix it with clove, ginger, and cardamom. Some even toss in a dried lime or two. Each cafe boasts its secret blend, and you start to suspect they're all just improvising with whatever's left in the pantry. But somehow, it works. And now, the world comes knocking. Ships arrive from Istanbul, Venice, Goa. Sailors stagger off decks and make a beeline for the nearest cafe, like they're reuniting with a long-lost lover. You meet a Dutch navigator who insists his captain tried to plant coffee in a greenhouse back home. Didn't go well, he mutters. Mildew like you wouldn't believe. He gives you a tin cup of what he calls seaman's brew, thick, black, nearly chewable. You politely fake a sip and excuse yourself before your taste buds riot. One afternoon, in the quieter back alleys, you find something unexpected. A coffee garden. Not a wild forest like in Kaffa. Not a small village plot. A proper, rectangular, well-tended plantation. The plants are shorter, more disciplined, neat rows, raised beds, shaded cloth. You speak with an old farmer who tells you these trees descended from Ethiopian stock but now have Arab soul. You ask if that makes the coffee taste different. He smiles. Coffee, he says, takes on the dreams of whoever grows it. That night, you walk by the port and watch a crew load crates of beans marked for Cairo, another for Damascus. One even headed to a small Ottoman outpost in Greece. Coffee is on the move, fast. And there's gossip now, always whispered, never shouted, that some Europeans want to grow their own. Secret missions, smuggled seedlings, a priest who tried to baptize a sapling to make it behave better. You can't make this stuff up. The locals aren't thrilled. Some traders begin to demand beans be parched before export, roasted just enough to prevent planting, ensuring Yemen's monopoly stays intact. Others argue it's just superstition or ego. You stand at the edge of the dock watching lantern light flicker on the waves and realize this story is about to go global. The cup you drank in the monastery, the smoke you smelled in Harar, the caravan ride through the dust, all of it is spreading. Faster than camels, faster than gossip, faster than sleep. But here in Mocha, it's still intimate, still tender. You wander back into the cafe district, trailing the scent of cardamom and roasted dreams. A boy offers you a cup. You take it, sip, smile. The flavor is bold, spicy like cinnamon spoken through silk, different, but familiar, always familiar. It's not the same bean anymore. It's an idea, a ritual, a memory you can drink. And tomorrow. The ships carry that memory farther still. You leave Mocha just as the winds shift. A ship needs wind, they say, and so do you. Your feet are restless again, and your satchel, light on beans now, but heavy with stories, itches against your side. So you board a vessel headed north, up through the Red Sea, bound for Cairo. The sea rolls gently under the hull. You sleep on a coil of rope and wake to gulls. Each morning the ship's cook brews a pot of rough tar-black coffee with a pinch of salt and coriander. Keeps the rats out of your thoughts, he jokes. You decide not to question it. By the time the boat nudges into the canal-fed docks of Cairo, you've rehearsed your role. Not a merchant, not a monk, just a curious traveler with a nose for the bitter and divine. Mainstream fact. By the mid-16th century, Cairo had become a thriving hub for coffee consumption. Sufi orders embraced the drink for spiritual wakefulness, and the general population followed eagerly. Coffee houses, kawas, sprang up like mushrooms after rain. Fringe tidbit. The Ottoman authorities who ruled Egypt at the time occasionally banned or heavily taxed coffee. Why? Not because it was dangerous, but because it encouraged people to talk too much, especially about politics. Can't have that over breakfast. Historians still argue whether Cairo's early cafes were inspired by spiritual practices or social rebellion, or both. One scholar even likened the cafe to a secular mosque where men gathered not to pray, but to ponder. You walk through Cairo's crowded streets, ducking past spice sellers, flute players, and a camel who absolutely refuses to move. The smell of grilled lamb mingles with dust and perfume, but behind one wooden door you find it. That unmistakable warmth. Roasted beans, simmering water, cardamom rising in curls. You've found your first kawa. Inside it's dim and humming. Men in flowing robes lean over small brass cups. A poet recites verses into the murk. A group plays a board game you don't recognize but pretend to understand. You take a seat in the corner. The server says nothing, just places a steaming cup before you. You sip. It's strong, slightly bitter, and somehow thoughtful. You can't explain it, but the coffee here tastes like listening. It doesn't take long for you to realize that coffee houses in Cairo are more than cafes. They're theaters, libraries, salons. One evening you hear a philosopher argue that coffee sharpens the intellect more than any university. The next, a musician insists it lets him hear the rhythm of the stars. Some cafes host shadow puppet plays. Others offer chess. One particularly strange place simply plays whale sounds and lets patrons stare at the ceiling. Very modern, someone says. But your favorite is a cramped little room near Al-Azhar Mosque, where the clientele whispers like conspirators, and every cup is served with a single date. You call it the Whisper House. No one corrects you. One afternoon, while sipping quietly at the Whisper House, you overhear two men arguing softly about the origin of the beans in their cups. One claims Ethiopian mountains. The other insists on Yemeni valleys. Neither budges. You lean over and suggest, maybe both are right. They blink, then nod, then invite you to their table. Coffee diplomacy at work. By now, you've adopted the Cairo coffee ritual. You let the grounds settle. You don't rush. You never ask for sugar. It comes if it comes. And always, you listen more than you speak. In this city, you realize, coffee is part of the architecture. Every alley has a scent trail. Every rooftop, a brewing pot. Even the call to prayer seems to pause politely for a sip. But it isn't all harmony. One morning, word spreads. A crackdown. The governor has ordered certain cafes closed for disturbing the moral order. You watch as a beloved kawa near the market is shuttered, its patrons sent scattering. A small boy runs off carrying the last cup still steaming. You ask a bookseller why coffee is being targeted. He shrugs and says, because it keeps people awake. That night, the Whisper House stays open but quiet. No poetry, no debates, just sips and glances. You realize something profound. Coffee is rebellious by nature, not in fire or swords, but in its refusal to let people sleep through injustice, boredom, or the grind of repetition. It wakes not just the body, but the room, and yet it soothes. How strange! You spend your last day in Cairo walking the length of the city, following your nose. Every corner gives you a new blend, a new style, a new interpretation of the same humble bean. The drink hasn't changed, but the people have. And so have you. As night falls, you sit on a balcony above the river. Below, a vendor brews coffee over coals, his kettle singing. You take a final sip and let the bitterness bloom on your tongue like a secret. The Nile hums beneath you. Somewhere, someone lights another stove, and the story moves forward. You leave Cairo by caravan again. No boats this time, no camels either. Just you and a creaky wooden cart full of brass kettles, headed toward Istanbul. The road stretches long, dust-caked and sun-dazzled, snaking through Levantine valleys and Ottoman checkpoints. You hitch rides with spice traders, scholars, once even a goat thief who insists he's just borrowing indefinitely. Everyone drinks coffee. No one drinks it the same way. By the time you reach Istanbul, your palate is confused, but your spirit is energized. You've entered a city where coffee isn't just a drink anymore. It's a lifestyle, a fashion, a political tool, and, depending on who you ask, a matter of marital compatibility. Mainstream fact. By the 17th century, coffee had become integral to Ottoman court culture. In fact, it became such a staple that one Ottoman law stated a woman could divorce her husband if he failed to provide her with daily coffee. That's not just commitment, that's caffeinated law. Fringe tidbit? Some court advisors believed excessive coffee consumption could make people too reflective, too dreamy. One sultan briefly banned it, claiming it led to melancholic tendencies and excessive poetry. A terrifying fate. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman love of coffee was driven by its stimulating effects, its social versatility, or its alignment with Sufi ideals of wakeful worship. Likely all three, but each historian, oddly, insists they're sipping the real reason. You step into Istanbul like Alice through the coffee-scented looking glass. The city is a lattice of domes and steam. Copper pots hang from every shop awning. Coffee isn't brewed, it's conjured. The method here is different, sezve, they call it. A small brass pot with a long handle brewed low and slow over hot sand. Yes, actual sand. Your first cup arrives with thick foam on top and what looks like sediment at the bottom. You try to drink it all at once and instantly regret your life choices. A bearded gentleman laughs, pats your back, and says, "Don't chase the grounds. They'll find you eventually." He's not wrong. In Istanbul, coffee is always accompanied by something, a sweet, a story, or a subtle insult. You're invited to a gathering of coffee fortune tellers, women who read the future from the shape of grounds left in your cup. One of them looks into your saucer and says, "You're destined to travel far, chase a shadowy dream, and eat something regrettable in Venice." You thank her and avoid street meat for a week. Your favorite cafe is near the Topkapi Palace, where bureaucrats and poets sip in silence while the coffee boy makes rounds with the grace of a ballerina. He never spills a drop, no matter how crowded the room or how aggressively someone gestures mid-debate. One evening, you stumble into a coffee house that doubles as a chess club. You lose 5 games in a row, but win a friend who claims to have once served coffee to the Sultan himself. He took it with clove and sugar, the man says, like a man preparing for battle or bedtime. But court coffee is a world of its own. Through a friend of an almond merchant, you manage to observe the imperial kitchen from afar. It's like watching a silent opera. Rows of servants roasting beans over low fire, grinding them with rhythmic precision. They brew in synchrony, pour in procession, and serve in cups so tiny you wonder if the Sultan even gets a full sip. But the performance is the point. Coffee at court is ritual. It's theater. It's about grace, timing, poise. The Kavatibasha, chief coffee maker to the Sultan, is a position of immense prestige. You hear rumors that one served for 20 years without ever spilling a drop or letting the foam collapse. You also hear that one was poisoned, occupational hazards. Back in the city, you learn the unspoken codes. Never ask for sugar directly, it'll be offered. Don't clink your spoon too loudly, it's vulgar. Never argue politics after your 3rd cup, it ends in poetry or duels. You also learn that coffee plays matchmaker. In Ottoman households, when a man proposes marriage, the prospective bride serves him a cup of coffee. If she likes him, it's sweet. If she doesn't, salt. And you're expected to drink it all with a straight face, a brutal tradition. Also, hilarious. You attend one such coffee ceremony, invited by a kindly aunt who thinks you look confused enough to pass as local. The suitor drinks his salted cup like a warrior. He gets the girl. Everyone claps. You cheer and then quietly excuse yourself before anyone hands you a cup. At night, You sit on the Galata Bridge and watch steam rise from the city like it's exhaling. The Bosphorus glitters, and across the water someone brews another pot. You can smell it from here. You realize something. In Istanbul, coffee isn't just history, it's currency. It's conversation. It's the pause between empires, the space between ideas. You think back to the highlands of Ethiopia, to monks and goats and wild forests, then to Mocha's auctions, Cairo's kahwas, and now this, an empire brewed in tiny cups. And you wonder, if one sip can carry so much, where will the next take you? You've stayed in Istanbul longer than planned. Something about the way the rooftops smell of cardamom at sunrise makes it hard to leave. But eventually, the call of curiosity nudges you west again, this time across the sea and into Europe. Destination: Venice. You arrive not on a royal barge or even a respectable merchant ship, but crammed between barrels of olives and a deeply seasick goat. Travel is rarely glamorous, especially when your fellow passengers think coffee is a suspicious Arab tonic. Welcome to Renaissance Europe, where change brews slowly and often with suspicion. Mainstream fact. By the late 1600s, Venice became one of the first European cities to wholeheartedly embrace coffee. The first documented European coffee house opened here in 1645. It was considered exotic, luxurious, and, depending on who you asked, possibly immoral. Fringe tidbit? When coffee first arrived, some Christian leaders condemned it as the bitter invention of Satan. In fact, Pope Clement VIII was reportedly urged to ban the beverage. But after tasting it, he allegedly blessed it instead, saying, "This devil's drink is so delicious, we should cheat the devil by baptizing it." Historians still argue whether Venice embraced coffee for its taste, its novelty, or its role in the lively cafe culture that would soon spread across Europe. Some claim it filled a spiritual void left by fading religious institutions. Others insist it just helped people stay awake through long operas. You step off the boat into a city that feels half illusion. Water laps at the stone piers. Gulls scream at gondolas. Perfumed ladies carry small dogs in lace. And somewhere nearby you can smell it, faintly, like a whisper, roasting beans. You follow the scent past mask shops and bridges and startled tourists being overcharged for figs. Eventually, you find it. Venice's newest obsession, proudly displayed on a faded wooden sign that simply reads, "Cafe." Inside, it's candlelit and loud. A man in powdered wig argues with a painter about the soul of art. A woman in silk demands her coffee less black, more noble. A waiter brings you a cup with a flourish and absolutely no explanation. You sip. It's strong. Burnt, almost, but fascinating. The roast is darker here, probably because Italians still aren't sure how to brew gently. But the taste is confident, dramatic, like an aria in a cup. You glance around. This isn't the quiet, spiritual awakening of a Sufi lodge. It's caffeinated theater. People are performing opinions at full volume. And coffee? Coffee is the applause break between arguments. You spot a group of young aristocrats arguing whether coffee makes one more rational or more emotional. One swears it cured his poetry block. Another insists it made him forget Latin. You raise your hand and suggest, maybe it does both. They laugh and offer you a pastry shaped like a squid. That night, you wander Venice's back alleys, observing how this new beverage has infiltrated every level of society. Street vendors hawk it in tin cups. Noble women sip it in salons between gossip and sighs. Priests debate its morality even as they sneak second helpings. You hear whispers that some believe coffee can cure headaches, melancholy, even the plague. Others worry it incites rebellion. One Venetian doctor declares it better than wine, worse than war. In one especially memorable cafe, a mechanical bird sings every time someone finishes their cup. You try to sneak a refill just to hear it again. But coffee's European journey is just beginning, and Venice is only the gate. One afternoon, over a plate of squid-shaped biscuits and a well-balanced blend, you meet a trader named Lorenzo, who's preparing to bring beans up north. He invites you to join his caravan to Vienna. You hesitate. You're warm here, comfortable. Then he adds, "We stop in Trieste. They put cinnamon in it." Sold. As you prepare to leave, you look back at the Venetian lagoon. Gondolas bob. Laughter echoes from a cafe window. Somewhere, someone's coffee spills as they gesture too passionately, and the tide pulls you on. You leave the dreamy chaos of Venice behind, trading canals for cobbled roads as you make your way northeast. The air gets cooler, the dialects harsher, and the coffee somehow even stronger. Welcome to Vienna, city of composers, fortresses, and arguably the most dramatic pastry-to-cup ratio in history. You arrive with Lorenzo, the cinnamon-loving trader, just in time to witness a city in flux. The year is somewhere in the late 1700s, and Vienna is still licking its wounds from the Second Ottoman Siege. Cannonballs have stopped flying, but coffee beans are about to. Mainstream fact. After the failed siege of Vienna in 1683, legend claims that the retreating Ottoman army left behind hundreds of sacks of strange brown beans. While most locals thought they were camel feed, a clever spy named Jerzy Franciszek Kulczycki, originally from Poland, possibly a barista in a past life, recognized their value and opened Vienna's first coffee house, with milk and honey, and eventually whipped cream. Fringe tidbit. Some historians believe Kulczycki didn't just open the first cafe. He also invented the now famous Viennese habit of serving a glass of water alongside your coffee, supposedly so you can admire the color of your brew without distraction. Or maybe just so you don't die of dehydration. Who's to say? Historians still argue whether the coffee left by the Turks story is fact, myth, or some fragrant blend of both. There's very little documentation and a lot of national pride involved. But if it didn't happen, someone in Vienna is living a lie and selling commemorative mugs about it. The first thing you notice in Vienna is that coffee here comes with accessories. A silver tray, a biscuit, a handwritten note if you're fancy. It's less of a drink, more of a lifestyle. You settle into a cafe with a view of St. Stephen's Cathedral. The waiter wears gloves. The coffee arrives in porcelain so delicate, you're afraid your sarcasm might shatter it. You sip. It's smooth, velvety, almost dessert-like. There's no grit, no grounds, no risk of chewing your caffeine. This isn't the sand-brewed mysticism of Istanbul or the theatrical bitterness of Venice. This is elegance in liquid form. People don't shout here, they muse. Everyone's writing something. Letters, poems, manifestos. You watch as a man composes what you suspect is either a symphony or a breakup note. A woman 2 tables over critiques her own journal entry out loud. A child dips a biscuit in their espresso and contemplates existence. You're handed a small guide titled How to Order Coffee Without Causing a Scene. It includes 17 drink variations, including one with an egg yolk and 3 involving rum. You try the melange, half coffee, half steamed milk, topped with a froth so thick it could support a medium-sized bird. A local nods approvingly. You feel you've passed some sort of test. Then comes the Einspanner, a dark roast served in a glass, crowned with unsweetened whipped cream. Supposedly invented for carriage drivers who needed a warm drink that wouldn't spill while steering. You try to drink it while standing dramatically near a horse. It ends poorly. You begin to realize that in Vienna, coffee isn't about waking up. It's about slowing down. Even the sugar cubes take their time dissolving. You learn to pause, to breathe, to judge other people's footwear in dignified silence. One day, you're invited to a philosophical salon hosted by a baroness who believes all emotions can be mapped onto coffee types. Joy is a light roast. Regret is espresso. Romance, she says, is a cappuccino after 3 p.m. Taboo, but thrilling. You meet poets who argue that no art can emerge without caffeine, and scientists who whisper that coffee affects the alignment of your thoughts. One old man claims Mozart composed his operas in a single sitting, fueled only by Turkish blend and a sugar cube tucked under his tongue. You don't ask for sources. It's more fun to believe. In the quieter corners of Vienna, you find coffee houses that feel like libraries, their walls lined with books and clocks that never seem to tick. You sit there for hours, sipping slowly, listening to the soft clink of spoons against porcelain and the occasional sigh of a man remembering his youth, likely tied to an espresso. You hear murmurs about political revolution brewing in back rooms. Apparently, coffee houses have become gathering spots for dissenters, artists, dreamers, anyone who thinks faster than the monarchy would like. It's a risky blend of ideas and caffeine. At one point, you accidentally sit in a seat reserved for a local writer known for his tragic plays and sharper than average mustache. Rather than scolding you, he offers a biscotti and tells you, "Everything worth doing begins with good coffee, and often ends with a confusing footnote." You nod, as if this explains your entire trip. On your final night, you sip a Kleiner Schwarzer, a small, bold black coffee, and walk beneath the gaslights, your breath fogging in the chill. Vienna glows with music and restraint. Coffee steam curls from every alley like an invitation. You think back to Ethiopia's highlands, to Mocha's frantic docks, to Istanbul's powdered rituals. And now here, in Vienna, you've tasted something quieter. Coffee not as survival or seduction, but as style. An identity brewed in porcelain and quiet rebellion. And as the cathedral bells chime midnight, you wonder where the road will lead next. You leave Vienna with a sugar buzz and a suitcase that smells permanently like cinnamon. As you travel westward, the coffee houses become fewer. The accents shift again, and suddenly, just when you think you're out of the bean-scented woods, you find yourself in Paris. And Paris, well, Paris has opinions. Mainstream fact. The first Parisian coffee house opened in 1672, but it wasn't until the late 1600s that the famed Café Procope became a hub of intellectual life. Frequented by Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, it was less about sipping quietly and more about arguing dramatically while gesturing with croissants. Fringe tidbit. Voltaire reportedly drank 40 to 50 cups of coffee per day, sometimes mixed with chocolate. He lived into his 80s, possibly out of sheer defiance or caffeine. Historians still argue whether French cafes truly encouraged free thought, or whether they simply provided a socially acceptable venue to loudly insult people with powdered wigs and florid insults. You walk into Paris on a gray morning, your boots soggy from some very French drizzle. Immediately, someone critiques your coat, not rudely, just with concern. You duck into a nearby cafe and the smell hits you like a literary epiphany. Roasted beans, warm bread, a touch of perfume someone left behind. The waiter raises a single eyebrow and says, "Un café?" You nod. It arrives in a cup the size of a thimble. Strong, bitter, and entirely too proud of itself. You're not in Vienna anymore. At the next table, two men argue about the soul. A woman in lace declares love a political construct. A scruffy young man scribbles in a notebook labeled, "My Revolutionary Thoughts, Volume 2." You sip your tiny coffee and pretend to understand all of it. Soon you learn the rules of Parisian cafe life. Don't order too quickly. Never ask for milk after noon. And whatever you do, never call it just coffee. It is an experience, a statement, a mild insult to anyone who prefers tea. One cafe regular takes pity on you and explains the hierarchy. There's Café Noir, black. Café au lait, with milk. Café crème, fancier milk. And Café serré, so strong it can probably be used to polish brass. You try them all. Each time, you write something down in a little notebook so you look like you belong. You visit the famed Café Procope, where philosophers once sipped and squabbled. The walls still whisper with quotes. You swear you hear someone murmur, "I think, therefore I drink." Could be your imagination, could be the espresso. One night you find yourself invited to a salon de café, a candlelit gathering of writers, dreamers, and people who use the word bourgeoisie too frequently. They talk of liberty and bread prices. Someone reads a poem about beans. Everyone claps. You try to mention that coffee originally came from Ethiopia. A hush falls. "We," someone says cautiously, "but we have perfected it." You decide not to fight that battle tonight. The longer you stay, the more you notice how coffee in France is about presence. People sit for hours with one small cup, smoking impossibly thin cigarettes and judging pigeons. No rush, just observation. You once saw a man stare at a croissant for 15 minutes before eating it, as if waiting for it to confess something. And yet Paris is on the verge of change. Whispers of revolution float through the air like powdered sugar. Coffee houses are becoming forums of dissent. Barricades are still decades away, but the energy is simmering, like a mocha pot just before the hiss. In Montmartre, you stumble upon a cafe painted entirely in blue. The owner claims it's good for the mind. He serves you a café au lait with a spoon shaped like a tiny Eiffel Tower and asks if you believe monarchs dream of coffee. You say, only when they're losing sleep. He laughs, gives you a second cup for free. Before you leave Paris, you sit one last time beneath a wrought iron sign that reads, "La pensée brûlée," the burnt thought. Fitting. You reflect on everything you've tasted. The bitter, the spiced, the sweetened for royalty, the weaponized by intellectuals. You've come far, but there's still more brewing. A traveler with wide boots and a stained waistcoat tells you about a city across the channel where coffee came ashore with scandal and suspicion. A place where coffee houses were once outlawed for being too noisy. A land of fog and confusion and scones. He tips his hat and says, "London's calling." You gather your things, wipe croissant crumbs from your map, and follow the scent west. Crossing the English Channel, your ferry rocks gently, and you can't help but think, this is how coffee spreads. One cup, one curious person, one splash of scandal at a time. When you dock in Dover and make your way inland to London, the sky looks exactly as advertised. Gray with a slight chance of moody introspection. London in the late 1600s is less about elegance and more about elbows. The streets are muddy, the accents unpredictable, and the coffee? Surprisingly chaotic. Mainstream fact. England's first coffee house opened in Oxford around 1650, but London quickly took the lead. By 1700, There were over 500 coffee houses in the city, nicknamed penny universities, because for the price of a penny, you could sit and hear the latest news, gossip, or conspiracy theory from the man 2 chairs over. Fringe tidbit. In 1674, a group of women published the Women's Petition Against Coffee, claiming coffee was making their husbands useless as eunuchs and less interested in their marital duties. This was, in essence, one of history's first anti-caffeine manifestos. Historians still argue whether London's coffee houses truly fostered democratic ideals, or if they were mostly breeding grounds for questionable fashion, drunk pamphlets, and arguments about shipping lanes. You enter the city wide-eyed and mildly caffeinated. The air smells like soot, wet wool, and roasted beans. Men in powdered wigs shove past you. A horse snorts in your direction, like it knows you're foreign. You follow your nose to one of the earliest and rowdiest coffee houses, Pasqua Rosa's. Allegedly opened by a servant from the Ottoman Empire, this establishment was London's introduction to the bitter bean. Inside, it's loud, cramped, and smells of ink and ambition. No sugar, no milk, just thick, hot, black liquid served in bowls that look like they were borrowed from a dog. But no one's here for the flavor. They're here for information. You sit in the corner as people argue about Dutch trade routes, war with France, and whether cats secretly govern Parliament. Someone announces a new pamphlet, and a crowd forms instantly. You blink, and now you're subscribed to a political tract called The Weekly Coffee House Screech. You try to order a second cup, but the barista, who looks like he might also be a spy, tells you they're out of mugs. He hands you a small ceramic pot and says, "Drink quick. The East India Company's buying up everything." It's here that you meet merchants, philosophers, poets, and pickpockets. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone is convinced they're right. And thanks to the print culture of the time, everyone's thoughts are available in pamphlet form for threepence. One man invites you to Lloyd's, which you assume is a tavern, but turns out to be a coffee house that eventually evolves into the famous Lloyd's of London insurance market. Over cups of coffee, sailors discuss ships, risks, storms, and which captains are more likely to disappear off the coast of Madagascar. You sip carefully. There's a lot writing on your mug. Another day, you wander into Button's Coffee House, where the Guardian newspaper is born, and where writers like Joseph Addison and Richard Steele wax poetic about virtue, vice, and powdered wigs. There's no shortage of literary ambition here. You hear about Alexander Pope's sarcastic essays, Jonathan Swift's deadpan parodies, and one man's plan to start a magazine entirely about the benefits of drinking nothing but hot liquids. You quickly learn that London coffee houses are sorted by theme. There's one for poets, one for politicians, one for sailors, one for scientists. They're the 17th century equivalent of Reddit threads, just louder, smellier, and with more powdered sugar biscuits. But not everyone loves the brew. You read a royal proclamation banning coffee houses in 1675, claiming they were hotbeds of sedition and treason. The ban lasted all of 11 days, because it turns out even kings need a caffeine fix and somewhere to complain about Parliament. You attend a mock trial staged in a coffee house basement where patrons debate whether the moon is made of cheese or chalk. One man swears he saw a coffee plant growing in Hyde Park. Another says he drank a cup so strong it cured his gout and his bad marriage. You smile. London's logic is soaked in satire. One evening, you're invited to a private room above a coffee house near Fleet Street. Inside, candlelight flickers over maps of India, barrels of raw beans, and whispers about coffee plantations in Jamaica. The British Empire, it seems, has plans. You realize this is no longer just about taste. It's about control, about who grows the beans, who ships them, who profits. The empire's interest in coffee is growing by the hour, and the shadow of colonial expansion begins to stretch ominously across the globe. You leave the meeting with a headache and the distinct sense that sugar and spice aren't the only things being traded in the name of flavor. As the bells of St. Paul's toll midnight, you sip your last English brew at a quiet spot by the Thames. A fisherman nearby complains that coffee makes his hands shake. A printer whistles as he carries armfuls of pamphlets into the fog. And you wonder, how long until this drink, once sacred and rare, becomes a part of every household, every morning, every bleary-eyed moment of human routine? You don't know it yet, but your next stop might just have the answer. You leave London with ink on your fingers, pamphlets in your bag, and the echo of 100 heated debates ringing in your ears. The fog follows you for a while, clinging to your coat like gossip. But soon the air clears and you head south, back across the Channel, then farther still to the sun-warmed shores of the Caribbean. Here, in the late 17th century, coffee takes root in a very different kind of soil. Rich, tropical, and already brimming with imperial ambition. Mainstream fact: coffee first arrived in the Caribbean in the early 1700s, when the French introduced it to Martinique. From there, it spread rapidly to places like Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, Jamaica, and beyond, becoming a major colonial cash crop alongside sugar and tobacco. Fringe tidbit: legend says the coffee tree that started it all in the Caribbean came from a single sapling smuggled out of Paris's botanical garden by a naval officer, Gabriel de Clieu, who shared his water rations with it during a long voyage. Historians still argue whether this story is heroic botany or romantic nonsense invented for bored French textbooks. You arrive in Saint-Domingue by creaky ship, sunburned and slightly dazed. The moment your boots hit the dock, you're hit by the smell: lush vegetation, sea brine, a hint of rum, and the faint bitterness of freshly roasted coffee drifting from inland plantations. This is no European cafe. This is empire in bloom and rot. You head inland, through cane fields and into the highlands where the climate turns cooler and the soil darkens. Here, on steep mountain slopes, rows of coffee trees stand in ordered silence, tended by enslaved workers whose hands know the bean far better than any Enlightenment philosopher. You try to speak to a young field worker who glances nervously at the overseer before muttering, "We call it cafe, but we never drink it." You note the irony. Coffee, once brewed in ceremony by Ethiopian monks and savored in Arabian majlis, is now a colonial product grown by forced labor and served with cream in Paris. The plantation owner, an over-perfumed man with more rings than fingers, offers you a cup on his veranda. He calls it the future of the West Indies. You sip politely. It's strong. The bitterness lingers. Later that day, you visit a roasting shed where workers sort beans by hand, the air thick with heat and smoke. A woman hums an old tune as she stirs roasting beans in a wide, shallow pan. She tells you in a whisper that some say coffee plants grow better when they're sung to. You believe her. You're shown the plantation's ledger, rows of numbers, detailing how many pounds of beans are harvested, how many barrels are exported, and how many lashes are dealt. You close the book. By nightfall, the jungle hums with insects, frogs, and revolution. Yes, revolution. You've heard the whispers. A former slave named Toussaint is organizing something inland. They say he drinks coffee not to stay awake, but to remember, to plan, to outlast the sleep of empires. In the port town of Cap Français, you walk past merchants haggling over sacks of beans. Ships creak under the weight of Caribbean gold, brown and bitter, packed tight in burlap. An old sailor tells you that every barrel of coffee carries ghosts. You drink it, he says, and you taste the mountain, but you also taste the whip. The next morning, you board a mailboat bound for Jamaica. There, the British have started their own plantations, learning from the French how to profit from fertile land and captive labor. You hike into the Blue Mountains, where the mist curls low and the coffee plants seem to grow slower, more stubbornly. You meet a maroon guide who shows you a hidden grove, coffee plants wild and untended. "This is ours," he says, "not theirs." You sip a brew made over a small fire, thick and smoky. It tastes honest, less civilized, more alive. Down in the markets of Kingston, vendors sell coffee by the cup, sweetened with condensed milk, sometimes spiced with nutmeg or clove. It's not Parisian, it's not Ottoman, it's Jamaican, and it's glorious. You buy a small sack to take with you. The vendor smiles and says, "Tell them in Europe, we make it better." As you prepare to leave the Caribbean, the sun rising behind you, and the smell of roasted beans still clinging to your clothes, you reflect on what you've seen. This isn't just a tropical detour in coffee's journey, it's the engine room of empire. Coffee here is blood and sweat in liquid form, fueling the wealth of cities far away, and yet rarely tasted by those who grow it. You head back to the docks. Your next stop? A new world entirely. Across the vast Atlantic, coffee is taking root in a young, restless land. A place where colonists throw tea into harbors and brew rebellion in tin cups. You step aboard the ship. America awaits. The sea air sharpens your senses as you cross the Atlantic, bound for the American colonies. You imagine a land where liberty simmers alongside cider, where newspapers flourish like weeds, and where coffee is just beginning to muscle its way into the public's morning routine, mostly because someone threw a few hundred chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Mainstream fact? After the Boston Tea Party of 1773, coffee consumption surged in the American colonies, not purely for taste, but as an act of patriotic protest. Drinking coffee became a political statement, a bitter brew of rebellion. Fringe? Tidbit? Thomas Jefferson once called coffee the favorite drink of the civilized world, but his personal brews were often described as tragically weak. Monticello Guess wrote about his devotion to the bean with the same energy you'd reserve for a well-meaning but clueless barista. Historians still argue whether American coffee culture was truly homegrown or just another European transplant that got a little louder, a little bolder, and a lot more caffeinated. You arrive in Boston, and the city greets you with cobblestones, fog, and the unmistakable aroma of roasted beans drifting from a corner tavern. You walk in expecting ale, but the barkeep offers you the Patriot's Cup, black coffee with a splash of molasses and a very pointed glare at anyone asking for tea. The room is full of chatter, freedom, taxes, war. You sip and listen, noticing how coffee houses here have more of a revolutionary tinge than their European cousins. Less powdered wigs, more flintlocks. You meet a printer named Revere. Yes, that Revere, who drinks 3 cups before sunrise and claims caffeine helps him etch metal faster. Keeps the hand steady, he says, shaking violently. You attend a local meeting in a coffeehouse basement. It's crowded, loud, and smells faintly of tobacco, ink, and unfinished declarations. Someone's drafting what sounds suspiciously like a constitution, and every other sentence begins with, "We hold these beans to be self-evident." At a small farmhouse in Virginia, you visit Monticello. Jefferson himself pours you a weak, watery cup. You smile politely, and make a mental note to sneak off to the kitchen later. He shows you his imported beans, a custom grinder, and a silver urn that gleams like ambition. You wonder if anyone's told him how bad this coffee is. Meanwhile, in the northern cities, New York, Philadelphia, coffee houses are blossoming. These aren't just cafes, they're newsrooms, courtrooms, and revolutionary incubators. One proprietor tells you proudly that he installed a pigeon loft above his cafe to receive messages from other colonies. You nod and try not to imagine the flavor profile of pigeon-roasted espresso. You watch merchants strike deals over breakfast brews. Politicians rehearse speeches between sips. Writers furiously pen treatises while their coffee goes cold. It's not romantic, it's frantic, but it works. In Charleston, you meet a woman named Eliza, who roasts and sells her own blends on the street corner. Men talk, she says, but women brew. Her beans are strong, spiced and laced with ginger. Her stand is surrounded by a steady crowd. Revolution has many faces, and some of them wear aprons. You follow a trail of coffee out west, through Pennsylvania and into the Ohio Valley. Settlers carry tin kettles and coarse burlap sacks, waters boiled over open fires, coffee brewed cowboy style, strong, murky, and served with grit both literal and metaphorical. You share a cup with a soldier in a muddy camp. He tells you it's the only thing keeping him upright. They can take the boots off my feet, he says, but not my morning cup. Back in Washington, the young capital is rising out of the swamp. A senator hands you a mug and says, "This here? This is democracy in liquid form." You're not entirely sure if he's joking. By now, you realize American coffee isn't about tradition. It's about function. About moving fast, waking up, standing tall. It's messy, practical, and thoroughly unromantic. But it's everywhere. In homes, it's boiled in dented kettles. In taverns, it's poured beside speeches. On battlefields, it's gulped like medicine. No ceremony, no incense, just caffeine and grit. Even the first ladies get involved. Abigail Adams is rumored to favor a strong brew. Dolly Madison, known for serving coffee with just enough sugar to soften the debates around her dinner table. And slowly, as America grows, so does the bean. Immigrants bring new roasting techniques. Traders import better blends. Inventors develop percolators and grinders. By the mid-1800s, coffee has become a cornerstone of American life, served in tin cups on prairies, fine china in parlors, and in battered mugs during gold rushes. You board a steam train bound for the Midwest. In the dining car, a cook with forearms like hams hands you a mug that tastes like it was brewed with old railroad bolts. You drink it anyway. It's tradition now. As the train rolls on and night falls outside the window, you feel the jolt of progress. America runs on rail, and rail runs on coffee. You think back to the gentle ceremonies of Ethiopia, the intellectual hum of Ottoman cafes, the satirical madness of London's coffee houses, and the bitter plantations of the Caribbean. Here, coffee is neither sacred nor scandalous. It's fuel. Liquid rebellion, ambition in a cup. And the story isn't done yet. In the distance, across oceans and mountains, a new chapter brews. In Brazil, in Indonesia, in the jungles and highlands where the next empire of beans will rise. You close your eyes and take one more sip. You wake to the shriek of jungle birds and the distant thrum of drums echoing through a green, endless canopy. The air is thick, humid, almost drinkable, and it carries the scent of something earthy, smoky, and unmistakably caffeinated. Welcome to Brazil, early 19th century. Coffee here doesn't just grow, it explodes. Mainstream fact: By the mid-1800s, Brazil became the world's largest producer of coffee, a title it still holds today. The scale was staggering. Millions of beans, millions of workers, and a global appetite that kept the ships moving non-stop. Fringe tidbit: one popular myth claims that coffee came to Brazil thanks to seduction and espionage. A Brazilian diplomat allegedly wooed the wife of the governor of French Guiana, who gave him a bouquet. Within it, smuggled coffee seedlings. Historians still argue whether this story is fact or spicy colonial fan fiction, but either way, the beans arrived. And then, things got real. You land in Rio de Janeiro on a muggy morning. The port bustles with cargo and chatter in Portuguese, Tupi, and African tongues. Men hoist sacks of beans onto ships bound for Europe, their shirts soaked through before noon. The whole city smells like sea, sweat, and slow roasting coffee. But it's inland where the story really unfolds. You ride upriver and up country, through lands carved from rainforest into neat rows of coffee trees. Vast estates or fazendas sprawl across hillsides. Some are small and family-run. Others resemble empires unto themselves. Self-sustaining worlds powered by enslaved labor and caffeine-rich ambition. You're offered a cup by a fazenda owner who wears a cravat even in the jungle heat. He pours from a silver pot with all the flair of a European courtier. The brew is dark, syrupy, almost medicinal. He calls it café forte, and it leaves a pleasant burn in your chest. He talks profit margins and export rates while peacocks wander lazily through the garden. Later, in the workers' quarters, the coffee is weaker, thinner, often sweetened with burnt sugar or cassava, but the stories are stronger. Elders remember the earliest beans. Children already know how to sort, dry, and roast. You learn that for many, coffee isn't just a crop. It's an inheritance, a burden, a passport. Slaves and later freedmen work the trees year-round, building Brazil's economy one cup at a time, while getting little more than exhaustion in return. In the towns along the coffee belt, São Paulo, Campinas, Santos, you see a growing class of coffee barons investing in opera houses, railroads, and European art. Coffee doesn't just change Brazil's economy. It rewires its entire social order. And the irony? The country's early elites often preferred tea. Still, by the 1880s, coffee is everywhere. Farmers pray for rain in planting season and drought during harvest. Trains called Maria Fumaça, Smoking Mary, carry beans downhill to the ports, huffing steam and coffee dust as they go. You ride one, seated beside a merchant with a leather-bound ledger and a tin flask of café com rapadura, sweetened coffee with raw sugar cane. It tastes like caramel and ambition. You visit a warehouse in Santos, where beans are sorted into grades like school children. A worker shows you how to sniff for mold, how to listen to the shake of beans in a burlap sack to judge moisture. He grins and says, "The nose knows more than the king." You nod, understanding. Coffee is democracy in its own bitter way. As the abolition of slavery nears in 1888, Brazil's coffee empire shifts again. Italian and Japanese immigrants arrive to work the fazendas, bringing with them new techniques and tastes. You're invited to a farmhouse where a nonna stirs coffee on a wood stove and serves it with bread, olives, and stories of the old country. Later, you attend a street cafe in São Paulo. A Japanese-Brazilian vendor brews pour-over coffee using cloth filters and methodical precision. The resulting cup is clear, fragrant, and balanced. A far cry from the heavy sludge of the plantations. You realize Brazilian coffee has as many faces as Brazil itself. Colonial, indigenous, immigrant, aristocratic, revolutionary. And yet, despite the variety, one thing binds it all: scale. Nowhere else does coffee grow like this. Vast monocultures stretch to the horizon. Shipping routes are restructured. Fortunes made and lost. It's not a beverage anymore. It's a national identity. One evening, on a misty hill above the Paraíba Valley, you meet a poet turned coffee inspector. He sips thoughtfully, then recites a line. O Brasil é feito de café e sonho. Brazil is made of coffee and dreams. You smile and drink with him under the stars. As dawn breaks over a sea of green coffee trees, you sense something shifting. Coffee's center of gravity is no longer in Ethiopia or Istanbul or even Paris. It's here, lush, laborious, unstoppable. But the world keeps spinning. New frontiers await. Machines are coming. Cafes are evolving. And the drink once brewed by monks is about to enter the modern age. You pack a satchel of beans, some raw, some roasted, and turn toward the docks again. A steamship waits, bound for Europe, where the Industrial Revolution has brewed a fresh thirst for caffeine. And you're not done yet. You dock in London again, but this time, the skyline bristles with chimneys and smokestacks. The air is denser now, soot-laced and smelling faintly of coal, horse sweat, and the greasy promise of industry. Welcome to the 19th century's version of progress, where even your coffee feels a little mechanical. Mainstream fact: the Industrial Revolution transformed coffee from a luxury into a working-class staple, especially in the rapidly growing cities of Europe and North America. Factory workers needed a legal stimulant, and coffee was the cheapest form of energy they could guzzle. Fringe tidbit? In some British textile mills, coffee tokens were handed out to workers instead of cash for breaks, like a jittery form of company scrip. Free caffeine, yes, but also surveillance in a ceramic cup. Historians still argue whether this era truly democratized coffee or simply caffeinated the misery of 10-hour shifts and 6-day weeks. You step off the steamer and straight into a throng of rail-thin men with rolled sleeves and women in soot-dusted bonnets rushing toward the textile mills. One young boy hands you a tin cup filled with thick black brew from a communal urn. No cream, no sugar, just survival. "Break's over," he says. "Hope you drank fast." In these coffee stalls, set up near factories, foundries, and dockyards, you find the caffeine equivalent of the pub. It's hot, harsh, and highly efficient. Some vendors even add burnt chicory or roasted barley to stretch the grounds further. If your cup tastes a bit like toast, now you know why. At a workers' tenement in Manchester, you're invited to breakfast. The family of 7 shares a loaf of bread and a kettle of sweetened coffee, thickened with condensed milk. It's a small joy between the long hours ahead. You sip gratefully. It's not gourmet, but it's home. You pass through Paris, where the cafe is evolving too. No longer just a haunt for poets and revolutionaries. It's becoming a cultural institution. You sit beneath striped awnings, watching waiters in bow ties serve espresso to lovers and artists alike. A young man in spectacles next to you is sketching something abstract on a napkin. "Caffeine," he says, "is my muse." He has 6 empty demi-tasses in front of him. You nod politely and slowly edge your cup out of his reach. Meanwhile, in Vienna, the famous coffee houses have taken on an opulent glow. Marble tables, gilded walls, newspapers in every language. You sit for 3 hours, drinking a single melange while watching the city's intelligentsia argue about Freud and fashion. Your waiter refills your cup without asking. You tip him with a gold coin, and he bows with exaggerated melancholy. You visit Berlin next, where cafes are more austere, less cream, more caffeine. A professor offers you a cup while lecturing on the physics of steam engines. You're not sure what he's saying, but the coffee is hot and the biscuits are free. Across the Atlantic, you land in New York, just in time for the age of the automat. Coffee dispensed from shiny metal spouts, sandwiches behind little glass doors, and people eating alone in shared silence. It's efficient, impersonal, and strangely soothing. A woman in a cloche hat sips her coffee with lipstick-stained elegance. "You can learn a lot," she says, "watching people drink." You take her word for it. In Chicago, you find yourself at a train station where every newsstand sells hot coffee in paper cups. The vendor tells you he goes through 30 gallons before noon. Helps folks think faster, he says, or at least walk straighter. He winks and tops off your cup for free. By the 1890s, the coffee craze is industrialized to the hilt. Vacuum-sealed cans, factory roasting, mass marketing. Brands like Folgers and Maxwell House appear, promising convenience and consistency in every tin. You visit a roastery in San Francisco where giant drums spin and hiss like Victorian monsters. The aroma is intoxicating, a mix of caramel, smoke, and ambition. A salesman hands you a packet labeled "good to the last drop." You raise an eyebrow. "Try it," he says. "It's science." You try it. "It's drinkable." You smile and nod. He looks relieved. Back in Europe, the espresso machine is born. First as a noisy, temperamental beast that hisses like an angry cat. You witness a demonstration in Milan, where a barista named Luigi proudly pulls 2 tiny, bitter shots in under a minute. "Fast coffee for fast people," he boasts. You down yours in one go and immediately forget how to blink. With coffee now fueling factories, trains, and typewriters, a new ritual is born: the coffee break. In 1902, a Norwegian immigrant named Stoughton in Wisconsin allegedly gave his female employees a 10-minute pause every afternoon for rest, relief, and refreshment. The idea spreads faster than spilled beans. You stand in a Midwestern office building beside a clunky percolator. A typist leans over and whispers, "I pretend I like the coffee. Really, I just want to breathe." Relatable. You swing south to New Orleans, where the French influence lingers in every cafe. Chicory is still king, and the city's brews are dark, sweet, and almost chewy. You dip a beignet into your cup and immediately gain 5 pounds of joy. Later, on a paddle boat drifting down the Mississippi, you sip steamy coffee from a porcelain cup as a jazz trio plays softly nearby. The trumpet sighs, the boat creaks, the caffeine hums in your chest like a gentle drum. The industrial age gave the world many things, some wondrous, some wretched. But amid the gears and grind, coffee became a common thread. A pause, a ritual, a small rebellion against the cold march of progress. You step back onto solid ground, brushing soot from your coat and adjusting your caffeine-stained gloves. And as the 20th century dawns, you feel something new brewing. Not just coffee, but identity. Who drinks it, how they drink it, where they gather to sip. All of it is changing. And the next wave? It's already steaming on the horizon. You step into the 20th century like it's a cafe with automatic doors, gliding open with a whoosh of modernity and just a hint of burnt espresso. Mainstream fact: the 1900s saw coffee become a full-blown global commodity, powered by marketing, mass production, and the rise of cafe culture in the West. The drink once brewed by monks and royals, now filled styrofoam cups in gas stations, army mess tents, and break rooms from Detroit to Delhi. Fringe tidbit? During World War II, American soldiers were issued instant coffee in their rations, leading some veterans to associate the taste of war with those gritty, tinny granules. One brand even boasted coffee in 3 seconds, a feat both amazing and vaguely suspicious. Historians still argue whether instant coffee democratized caffeine or just watered down its soul. You begin this century in a flurry of uniforms and ration cards, seated on a folding crate outside a field tent in North Africa. A GI hands you a warm canteen cup. "It ain't Paris," he grins, "but it'll keep your eyes open." It tastes like battery acid with nostalgia stirred in. You drink it anyway. Back home, the American diner takes center stage. You slide into a red vinyl booth as a waitress in a pink uniform pours from a steaming glass pot. "Bottomless," she says with a wink, "if you can survive it." The cup is cheap, slightly chipped, and endlessly refilled. You hear truckers arguing about baseball, a teenager scribbling lyrics in a notebook, and someone softly weeping into a slice of pie. Coffee, somehow, ties it all together. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Japan elevates coffee to a different art form. You step into a kisaten, a quiet, wood-paneled coffee house in post-war Tokyo. A barista wearing suspenders and solemn precision brews a siphon pot like he's diffusing a bomb. You sip. It's floral, clean, and haunting. You whisper, "Is this legal?" He nods, unsmiling. In Italy, espresso finds its soul. You bounce between Roman cafes, watching locals throw back cafe like it's holy water. Standing at the bar, you down a shot in 3 seconds and wonder if your ancestors felt this alive. A Vespa honks. A nun steals your biscotti. You're too jittery to care. France, of course, still loves its cafes. But now they buzz with existentialists and writers debating whether the universe cares about croissants. Jean-Paul Sartre peers at you from behind thick glasses and says, "Coffee is proof of nothing." You move your seat, carefully. In the 1960s, coffee takes to the streets. In San Francisco's North Beach, beat poets perform in espresso-scented basements. You sip a cappuccino while a man named Leonard recites a poem about clouds and tax audits. It makes no sense, but the coffee is spectacular. Then comes the chain reaction, literally. Fast food explodes, and with it, drive-through coffee. You find yourself at a roadside diner in Kansas, holding a waxy cup that claims to contain 100% Colombian. The coffee's lukewarm. The optimism is boiling. Back in Brazil, plantations shift to mechanization. You hop into a combine harvester the size of a whale and ride through a sea of coffee trees. The farmer explains how international demand is higher than ever. But so are prices, labor disputes, and climate anxieties. You sip from a thermos as he gestures to a drying patio filled with beans. "The future," he mutters, "depends on rain and Wall Street." And then, Seattle. The 1980s arrive in a swirl of turtlenecks, jazz music, and freshly ground beans. You walk into a brand new coffee house with dark wood walls and a strange name, Starbucks. A young barista recommends a Cafe Verona. "It's got body," he says. "Like jazz you can drink." You sit near the window and watch as the coffee house evolves into a lifestyle. Laptops, journals, first dates, screenplays. It's no longer just caffeine, it's a personality. Later, you visit Ethiopia again. The beans are still roasted over open flame, ground by hand, and served in small, handleless cups. A girl in a yellow dress offers you a brew made with cardamom and reverence. It's the same ritual, but somehow deeper now, heavier with memory. She says, "This was always ours." You nod. You feel it. By the 1990s, Coffee goes global like never before. Fair trade, organic, rainforest certified. You tour a co-op in Guatemala where farmers explain how certification lets them feed their kids and send them to school. You sip a medium roast that tastes like citrus and resolve. You ask what they drink. Mostly instant, they shrug. It's cheaper. The irony is piping hot. You visit a lab in Helsinki where scientists are mapping coffee genomes. One holds up a test tube and says, "Soon we'll grow beans without soil." You check your cup nervously. In Istanbul, the traditional method survives. You return to a familiar cafe, watching the kezve bubble over sand, the grounds thick as river mud. An old man smirks at your hesitation. "Drink slow," he says, "or see the future too fast." You do both. As the 20th century ends, coffee has become something new, both intimate and global, sacred and commodified. It is street fuel and ceremony, memory and marketing. You take a final walk through a 24-hour cafe in New York City. A cop, a cabbie, and a philosophy student sit at separate tables. No one speaks, but they all sip. And for a moment, everyone's awake. You stand now at the cusp of the 21st century, watching steam curl from a paper cup printed with a minimalist logo and a punny name, something like Grounds for Thought or Espresso Yourself. Coffee has entered its most reflective phase yet. It's no longer just something people drink, it's something they curate. Mainstream fact? Third-wave coffee culture emphasizes sourcing, traceability, and brewing precision. Baristas become artisans. Beans are discussed like fine wine. Latte art competitions exist. Coffee has reached peak identity crisis. Fringe tidbit. In South Korea, a growing trend of silent cafes offers total quietude. No talking, no phone calls, just soft jazz and contemplative sips. You sit in one, absorbing the warm hum of stillness. Your espresso cooling slightly as you wonder if this is therapy or a lifestyle brand. Historians still argue whether the third wave has elevated coffee or just dressed up elitism in a V60 pour-over. You begin this section in Melbourne, arguably one of the coffee capitals of the world. A tattooed barista serves you a flat white with such precision it's almost spiritual. He explains the milk was frothed to precisely 65 degrees, the beans sourced from a single farm in Honduras, and the tasting notes include lychee, pecan, and, yes, mild regret. You nod sagely, then take a sip. It tastes really good. In Portland, Oregon, a barista with a PhD in anthropology serves your natural processed Yirgacheffe with a side of existential dread. "This coffee was fermented for 72 hours, she whispers, in a wooden tank used exclusively for jazz-aged mangoes. You say thank you, even though your brain's still processing that sentence. You attend a cupping session in Oslo, where solemn enthusiasts sniff, slurp, and describe brews using words like brambly, unctuous, and haunted forest. One guy insists his cup has notes of late-stage capitalism. You all nod. But in between the workshops and wireless cafes, you return to Ethiopia. Again. This time to Yirgacheffe proper, a lush, elevated corner of the country where many experts believe coffee as we know it truly began. You sit under a woven canopy with a woman named Silam, who is roasting green beans over open flame, just like her mother, and her mother's mother, and so on. She explains, slowly, gently, how each bean tells a story. "Coffee is not about speed," she says. "It's about memory." She pours 3 cups, one for you, one for her, one for the ancestors. And just like that, all the cafes, The chains, the cardboard cups, and chrome espresso machines fade away. It's just the two of you now, in the misty highlands, listening to beans crackle and goats bleat in the distance. You drink. It's earthy, smoky, and strangely familiar, like hearing a lullaby you didn't know you remembered. Later, in Dubai, you visit a futuristic cafe where a robot arm pulls your espresso shot. You drink it in silence, thinking of Salam. You wonder if the robot knows what she knows. Spoiler, it does not. In Nairobi, you attend a coffee hackathon, where developers code apps that track soil health and roasting profiles. You watch two Kenyan teenagers present a project titled Bean Blockchain. You clap. You still have no idea how it works. You step briefly into China, where cafe culture is surging, millions of new shops opening yearly. One Beijing barista tells you his most popular item is the dirty, a shot of espresso poured over cold cream. He grins. Coffee is sexy now. You smile back, stirring yours slowly, wondering when it stopped being merely brown water and started becoming poetry, politics, and personal branding. At last, you end this long walk through centuries of caffeine on a quiet morning. Maybe you're back home. Maybe you're nowhere in particular. You brew a simple cup with beans ground minutes ago. The aroma fills the air. You cradle the mug. You sip. And suddenly, you are a goat herder again. A monk. A merchant. A poet. A barista. A factory worker. A sultan's guest. A jazz musician. A time traveler. All of them, all at once. This is what coffee has always been. Not just a drink, but a bridge. Across class, across borders, across centuries. You take another sip. It's still warm. And now, after this long, winding journey through beans and brews, from the shadowed highlands of ancient Ethiopia to the minimalist counters of tomorrow's cafes, you can finally let your shoulders soften. Let the images blur a little. Those goats skipping across dry hillsides, the steaming urns of desert camps, the clinking china of Viennese salons, and the paper cups of midnight diners. Let them drift gently towards sleep. You've walked through markets thick with cardamom and chatter. You've crouched by fires, watching beans crackle in iron pans. You've tasted bitter, sweet, smoky, sour, flavors of empire, resistance, and ritual, all in a cup. And through it all, you stayed present, a curious traveler in soft shoes, listening, sipping, learning, never rushing, always watching. As your breathing slows, imagine the scent of coffee still lingering, faint but warm. A thread pulled through time, tying you gently to every person who's ever taken a quiet pause with a cup in hand. There is no need now for more facts or footsteps. Only stillness, only the final gentle exhale of steam rising in morning light. Let the world keep spinning outside. You're safe here, at the edge of sleep, where stories settle and the night carries you inward. You don't need to finish the cup. You're already full,